All right. Well, welcome everybody to our CATISOL Teaching of Pronunciation Interest Group webinar today. Today is our day for Joshua Gordon to present his research on segmental versus suprasegmental training, some insights from some research that he and his colleague did, and he'll tell us a lot more about it when you search. We also have a Padlet, and our Padlet can be found at tinyurl.com. We have a chance for you to subscribe to our channel. The CATISOL channel is for all kinds of videos that we put out. Now, I'm a little bit biased, and I think that top is the greatest IG. We put out a lot of interactive events, and so we have a lot going on there. But we also have a lot of other interest groups, and we have levels, and we have chapters who put on events. A lot of them are online, and so they're recorded. And sometimes we even record our face-to-face items, and we can find something there too. So if you have not already subscribed, then you might consider doing that, because that is something that can give you a lot of support as a teacher, not only of pronunciation, but of course of other aspects of the English language. And now I'd like to hand it over to Joshua Gordon. Joshua Gordon, how long have we known each other? For a little while? A few years?
I think that for a little bit, for about
Yeah, we've been
maybe a
hanging
little
out.
bit less than 10 years, maybe.
Yeah, okay. And we hang out in places where we are what? Kind of junkies about pronunciation and listening and
Pronunciation
speaking.
conferences or TESOL or AAA. Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, I'm so happy to have you here to tell us about your research and how it applies to our teaching ability in the classroom. So take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for being here. I'm actually very excited. So yes, thank you all for coming to this webinar, and I want to thank the Teaching of Pronunciation Interest Group of California TESOL for the invitation. And today I'll discuss the insights and the rationale behind the pronunciation classroom intervention in an EFL context. Here's an overview of the different aspects that I'll discuss today. First, I want to provide some background information that we took into consideration for this research. And then I'll move on to discuss general aspects about the study itself, the study that I'm presenting today, and how it was carried out. And I also want to present things a little bit backwards here, first by talking about the methodology and results of the study. And then after that, I'll focus on the rationale used to implement the teaching of segmentals and suprasegmentals as part of the treatment of our study. And finally, I'll discuss the implications of these results for pronunciation teaching. And before I begin talking about the study, I would like to mention that this study is part of an ongoing collaboration with Professor Isabelle Darcy from Indiana University. We published a couple of papers in the Journal of Second Language Pronunciation based on this study, one in 2022, and a more recent one in 2024, in which we list the details of the intervention for the 2022 study, which is what I would like to discuss today. So let me start by discussing some key aspects of research in second language pronunciation instruction that we took into consideration for the study. So different meta-analyses of research carried out previously have demonstrated that pronunciation instruction tends to be effective, and that the effects of explicit instruction can be seen in an improvement in phonetic and phonological accuracy in some cases, or in the perception of more intelligible speech. And this research has demonstrated that instruction could be effective even in learners who have spoken the language for a long period of time and whose pronunciation presents some entrenched characteristics. Some of these recent meta-analyses have also demonstrated the type of research scope of all these studies. Most of the studies carried out in research years have focused on the development of segments only, or vowels and consonants, whereas fewer studies have investigated the development of suprasegmentals or prosodic aspects like stress, rhythm, intonation, or a combination of both segmentals and suprasegmentals. One interesting aspect in research is that many studies are still guided by accent and nativeness principles, whereas Very few studies have been based on intelligibility principles or both nativeness and intelligibility principles. According to this narrative review published by Thompson and Derwin in 2015, in which they reviewed 75 studies out of 86 studies examined by Lee, Jan, and Plonsky in a meta-analysis. Another interesting aspect is also the focus of instruction in most research. In this same review of 75 studies, Thompson and Derwin found a tendency in most of these studies to focus on segmental aspects with 53% of those 75 studies. 23% of the studies surveyed focused on suprasegmentals or prosodic aspects, and 24% focused on both segmentals and suprasegmental aspects. And this was published 10 years ago already. But more recent meta-analysis suggests similar trends. For example, the most recent results of a much more complex meta-analysis by Saito and Plonsky seem to mirror these trends. Most pronunciation studies from 2008 to 2017 focused on very specific features, whether it is specific segmentals or suprasegmentals. And when I say specific features here, I'm talking about features in the speech signal, like measuring the duration of aspiration in voiceless stops or the acoustic quality of vowels by measuring formants. Fewer studies, however, have focused on the development of global aspects of pronunciation like perceived comprehensibility, fluency, intelligibility, and accentedness. And very few studies have focused on investigating both global and specific aspects of pronunciation. Now, despite all this research, we still have evidence from teacher surveys or classroom-based studies that many research findings are not necessarily applied well to classrooms. And part of the reason for this is certain limitations in teacher trainings. Many teacher education programs may not necessarily offer a training on pedagogical pronunciation for teachers. There's also the case that many researchers are simply not interested in pedagogical interventions, and they are more focused on the acquisitional aspects of pronunciation learning. So despite the advances in the field, we still have a gap between research and practice. But as pointed out by Foot et al. In 2011 and repeated once again by Thompson and Derwin 10 years ago, teachers will be more likely to implement systematic pronunciation instruction in their classes if they have evidence that following certain steps makes a difference for their students' pronunciation development. So with these ideas in mind, we implemented a pronunciation intervention in an EFL context in order to teach segmentals and suprasegmentals to 3 groups of second language learners at the college level. The study was guided by these 2 research questions. First, do EFL students improve their comprehensibility, fluency, and accentedness by the end of a 10-week pronunciation classroom intervention? And second, if so, what type of instruction leads to better comprehensibility, fluency, and accentedness? That is instruction based only on segmentals, suprasegmentals, or a combination of both. For the methodology, in very general terms, we had a total of 57 EFL learners who were native speakers of Spanish. We ended up with only 16 learners that we included in the final analysis. All of them were part of 3 intact EFL classes for students of different majors at a regional university in Costa Rica. The 3 classes were taught by 3 experienced teachers. The learners received a pronunciation treatment 30 minutes per week for a total of 10 weeks. We collected speech samples in a pre-test and a post-test, and then we presented those samples to native speakers of English to be rated for comprehensibility, fluency, and accentedness. So more specifically, the EFL learners received explicit pronunciation instruction in this content. One of the groups received a treatment based on segmentals, vowels, and consonants. The other group received a treatment based on suprasegmentals and connected speech. And finally, we had a 3rd group that received a combination of both segmentals and suprasegmentals. So from now on, I'll refer to these 3 groups as the segmentals, suprasegmentals, and mixed groups. For our participants, first we have the EFL learners. They were all enrolled in 3 EFL classes at a small regional university in Costa Rica. This was their first semester of English, and they were students of informatics and tourism. All of them were native speakers of Spanish, and their ages range from 17 to 21. We had high levels of attrition. Some students didn't complete all the treatment sessions, and some others couldn't complete the data collection tasks because of low proficiency. Usually, many students in Costa Rica finish high school with low English proficiency, unfortunately. We also had a few students who had lived in the United States previously and who were already very proficient in the language, and they just wanted an easy A in those courses. So we had to exclude all those participants. And in the end, we were only able to include 5 participants from the segmental group out of 18, 6 participants from the suprasegmental group out of 22, and 5 participants from the mixed group out of 17. And these are the only ones that we included in the final analysis. Our second group of participants consisted of 2 native speakers of English that we included in the analysis as a baseline for comparison purposes. They were native speakers of American English. One of them was female and the other was male. Their ages were 19 and 21, respectively, and they were undergraduate students at an American university in the Midwest. And both of them were from the same Midwestern region for uniformity purposes. And finally, we had a third group of participants who were 18 native speakers of English who were our raters. And they were undergraduate students at a small American university in the Midwest. They were naive raters, meaning that they were not students of linguistics or language teaching. And all of them were enrolled in a second semester of Spanish. They were not proficient in any other languages. And their ages were between 17 and 21, and they were from the same Midwestern region. In terms of the experimental treatment, for this study, we created a treatment based on an adaptation of Seltzer-Murcia et al.'s communicative framework for pronunciation teaching. The original framework by Seltzer-Murcia et al. Includes 5 different stages of description and analysis, listening discrimination, controlled and guided practice, and then communicative activities. So you can see that the framework goes from explicit instruction and then different forms of practice where students focus on form, and they also focus on form while attending to meaning. And finally, they have a communicative practice where they fully focus on meaning. So because of time constraints, we streamlined those 5 stages into 3 stages. So the teachers implemented an explicit presentation of pronunciation forms while with listening discrimination to make learners aware of different phonetic and phonological features. We also asked the teachers to provide teacher-centered information about pronunciation features using the different examples in the materials we provided. We added a practice stage that contained exercises focusing on form or focusing on meaning, and then a communicative component that included communicative tasks. These communicative tasks were designed following principles of task-based instruction. We didn't want students just to have a conversation, but we wanted to give them a task, something in which they had to find a solution to a problem, for example. As for materials, we created our own materials in some cases, and we also adapted materials from different textbooks, like the same Seltzer-Murcia et al. Textbook, Pronunciation Pairs by Baker and Goldstein, or Well Said by Linda Grant. We also included audio and video passages from interviews with both L1 and L2 speakers, and also passages from movies and sitcoms. We planned the lessons, and then we gave the materials and lesson plans to the 3 teachers, and they were free to adapt and deliver instruction in a way that they felt comfortable. So for the data collection, we collected spontaneous speech samples in a pre-test and a post-test. And to do this, we showed the EFL learners 2 short video cartoons and of about 2 minutes long each one, and they had to describe the main plot of the video. So all the students described 2 different videos, one during the pre-test and another during the post-test. And because this was spontaneous speech, after false starts at the beginning, we then selected the next 20 seconds of the description of the video. And that's what we presented to the native speaking raters in the rate task. The two native speakers that we had as a baseline recorded descriptions of both videos only once. So for the rating task, we randomized all the speech samples recorded in the pre-test and the post-test, and we presented these samples to the 18 native speakers of English raters. First, all the raters watched the two video cartoons described by the participants, and this was done in order to avoid biased ratings during the first samples. And then we told them that they would hear different speech samples that needed to be rated for comprehensibility, how easy or how difficult it was to understand each sample. Also fluency, meaning the natural flow of speech without unnatural pauses. And then accentedness, how different the samples were from, let's say, the expected patterns in a native speaker. And to do this, we gave the raters 3 Likert scales from 1 to 9. These are the same Likert scales used in previous studies. The only difference here is that in this case, the higher the ratings mean that the speech samples were more comprehensible, more fluent, and less accented. So here I have the results. We carried out a set of Cronbach alpha analysis to test inter-rater reliability, and this analysis turned out very high for comprehensibility, for fluency, and for accentedness, which means that there was a strong agreement among the raters in their different scores. So these are all the raw scores. You got the mean ratings from pre-test and post-test, or times 1 and 2. And as a reminder, the higher the score, the more comprehensible, fluent, and less accented the group. You can see that the native speakers we included as a baseline, the bottom, were rated as the most comprehensible, most fluent, and less accented as expected. Nothing new in there. So in order to focus on only the EFL learners, we removed the native speakers to carry out inferential analysis separately for comprehensibility, for fluency, and for accentedness. So for comprehensibility, we used the linear mixed effects model with comprehensibility as the dependent variable. Then we use group and time as fixed effects. For group, remember, we had segmental, suprasegmental, and mixed. And time, so we had time 1 pre-test and time 2 post-test. And we also used speaker as a random effect. And the analysis yielded no significant effect for group and no significant effect for time either. However, there was a significant group by time interaction in which the suprasegmental group became more comprehensible from pre-test to post-test, as opposed to the segmental and mixed groups that didn't change. For fluency, we used a similar linear mixed effects model with fluency as the dependent variable. Once again, we use group and time as fixed effects, with speaker as a random effect, and the analysis yielded no significant effect for group nor time. However, there was a significant group by time interaction, again, in which the suprasegmental group became more fluent from pre-test to post-test. There was also an improvement in the mixed group from pre-test to post-test, but this change was not statistically significant. And the segmental group didn't change from pre-test to post-test, and in fact, it looks like the speakers in this group became a little bit less fluent. For accentedness, we also used a linear mixed effects model for the analysis. And for this analysis, we declared accentedness as a dependent variable with group and time as fixed effects and speaker as a random effect. And in this case, the analysis didn't yield any significant effects for group, for time, or group by time. So there were no changes in accentedness. So here's a summary of our results. The only group that really improved and became more comprehensible and fluent from pre-test to post-test was the group trained on suprasegmentals. There were no significant changes in the segmental or mixed groups. However, I would like to mention that we also carried out individual analysis because of the low number of participants that we had. And there were also important changes in these other two groups. For example, 3 out of the 5 participants in the mixed group also improved from pre-test to post-test in comprehensibility and fluency, but there were 2 participants who were rated as less comprehensible and less fluent. There were also 3 participants that improved in comprehensibility and fluency in the segmental group, with 2 other speakers whose scores didn't change significantly or who became less comprehensible and less fluent. So those are our results, but I would like to show you what our pronunciation treatment looked like and the rationale that we use for the different types of activities that we implemented in these classes. First, in the segmental group, instruction for the segmental group started with explicit information about pairs of vowels or pairs of consonants. Because of time constraints, we prioritized very specific consonants and vowels, and we selected those based on 2 types of criteria. First was the functional load of segments. Some specific segments are more prone to cause problems in communication if learners mispronounce them. So we selected vowels and consonants with a high functional load. The second type of criteria we used was differences between English and Spanish, which was the native language of our learners. But in this case, it wasn't just about sounds present or not present in both languages, but systematic phonological differences in those segments that could impact comprehensibility, like, for example, the aspiration of voiceless stops or difference in tense and laxness in some vowels. So we presented 8 different vowels and 6 voiced and voiceless stops. We presented sounds in pairs or in sets of 3 that could be confusing for students because of similarities and differences between English and Spanish. For example, vowels a, and e, or consonants ta and da. As I mentioned before, we also took into consideration phonological differences between both languages that could make differences in communication, like aspiration in voiced stops. So for example, we presented stop sounds ba and pa together to explain similarities in place and manner of articulation. But more than such similarities, we presented these sounds together to make learners aware of differences in voicing and aspiration in voiceless stops. So we asked the teacher to explain the importance of aspiration, as lack of it could make voiceless stops sound very similar to voice stops in some cases. And to do this, the teacher used visual aids by presenting pictures with minimal pairs, and then the teacher provided explicit information about specific characteristics of these sounds. So here we have a sample of the sequence of the materials used. So first, presenting visual aids to make learners aware of the pronunciation of these 2 sounds, like in this case, pa and ba, and how it makes a difference in the pronunciation of different words in minimal pairs, such as pie and buy, or bear and pear. Then after that, the teacher explained differences in terms of voicing and explained that one of the sounds is voiced and the other one is voiceless. The teacher also got to present some other minimal pairs to make learners aware of differences between the 2 sounds. And it was up to the teachers to make learners, for example, repeat or not the differences between these 2 sounds in minimal pairs. As I said before, we created and adapted the materials and provided the lesson plans as a guide to the teachers, but they were responsible for implementing these materials in a way in which they felt comfortable. After this presentation of minimal pairs, the students got to see sagittal diagrams to study the articulation of the 2 sounds and how these 2 sounds are both bilabial and their difference is in terms of voicing. But then we also made sure that the students were made aware of other important features like aspiration in this case. So in this case, voiceless stops tend to be aspirated in a stressed syllable, but such aspiration is also deleted when there is an S sound before the voiceless stop. We also included some short listening discrimination exercises as part of the explicit presentation and listening discrimination stage. This is one taken from the textbook Pronunciation Pairs by Baker and Goldstein. You can see that here the learners have to listen to the words with these sounds first in isolated form, and then they have to listen to the same words with those sounds embedded in a phrase in context. After that explicit presentation and listening discrimination, we implemented some practice exercises. So the original communicative framework by Selsemursi et al. Makes a distinction between two types of practice. One of them is controlled practice, in which the focus is on form in controlled conditions. The other is guided practice, where the focus is still on form, but the learners also have to focus on meaning at the same time, which is to help learners start putting the form's practice under controlled conditions in a more communicative context where they have to focus on both form and meaning. So because of time constraints, we didn't necessarily make a distinction between these two types of practice. And sometimes we gave learners controlled practice, like in this case. Here, learners are supposed to work in pairs and take turns. One learner pronounces the words in the shaded boxes, while the other one writes down the words in the empty boxes. All the words are minimal pairs, as you can see. So this is controlled practice. But we also implemented more guided practice in some other cases. For example, this is guided practice, and it's a very similar exercise to the previous one. And here the focus is on form, yes, but at the same time, the learners have to simultaneously pay attention to meaning because the words are embedded in context. So both learners have to do their best to pronounce those words correctly and focus on perceiving the right form as well. So in this specific case, they work in pairs, and one of the students reads a phrase, and the other student has to write down the last word pronounced in that phrase. And after this practice stage, the learners engaged in communicative tasks, and we implemented the same types of communicative tasks in the three groups. So I'll show you a couple of examples of those later on. So let me show you now what the treatment in the suprasegmental group consisted of. For the suprasegmental group, we selected suprasegmental and connected speech features for two reasons. The first reason is because of their key value in the perception of intelligibility and comprehensibility. Previous research has indicated that features such as word and sentence stress or even speech rate can have repercussions on the perception of intelligibility and comprehensibility. So because of that, we combine both suprasegmentals and connected speech. The second reason is that previous research has also indicated that a focus on global aspects of speech, such as prosody and connected speech, can enhance comprehensibility, not only during a long treatment, but also during that short period of time. So this seemed suitable for this. So the prosodic features, the specific prosodic features we included were word stress, sentence stress, rhythm, and intonation. We also included features of connected speech such as pauses and thought groups, linking, contractions, vowel reductions in function words. And to present these concepts, we use different visual aids, such as fonts of different sizes, bold letters, or dark bubbles on top of phrases to demonstrate stress patterns. We also use short passages with no punctuation for the students to see all these features in context. So let me show you just some examples of the materials we used for explicit presentation and listening discrimination. As I mentioned before, we asked the teachers to provide teacher-centered explicit information to make learners aware of different features. So here's an example of the materials used to explain the concepts of thought groups and appropriate pauses. We started instruction focusing on thought groups and pauses to make learners aware of the way larger pieces of discourse are organized into different groups of words that go together. And also, starting with thought groups seemed suitable to bring learners' attention to the fact that different suprasegmentals and connected speech phenomena happen inside each thought group. And this is something that the reason why I have the Joker in there is because the previous year, the students were obsessed with that movie and they came up with different quotes from the movie. So I incorporated that into the teaching. And it turns out that it worked. And so then in the end, it's something that we put in the treatment and it seemed to work very well. Here's some more information about thought groups to make learners aware that speakers place words into these message units or thought groups and that the message may change depending on where we put pauses, but also to make learners aware that pauses cannot just be put any way we want, right? They need to separate clauses that make sense grammatically. Here's another type of material, and this one was used to present the concept of stress by using visual aids. Here the teacher had to give teacher-centered explanations. Here's another example with some more explicit information about stress rules, and you can see that we used visual aids like different fonts and bold letters to make learners aware of stress in these words. Here's some listening practice again to make learners aware of these features. In this case, with the teacher reading the words from one of these two columns of nouns and verbs in which the difference it's in the stress. Nouns in this case get stressed on the first syllable and verbs get stressed on the second syllable. So after that, we implemented some practice exercises, as I said, for the segmental group. Sometimes these exercises were more controlled, and at times, some other times, they were more guided. So some exercises look like this, focusing on prosodic features or connected speech at the phrase level. This is an exercise we adopted from Grant's Well Said, in which learners work in pairs, reading one word from these pairs of nouns and verbs, in which the difference is obviously in stress. And then the other student has to read the correct answer based on the word heard, either the noun or the verb, depending on the stress pattern that was perceived. So sometimes we had exercises like this one, but some other times we used exercises with short passages, so with larger pieces of discourse instead of just phrases and sentences. For example, here the students had to work in pairs to analyze specific written passage. The teacher provided short scripts of a passage like this one without any punctuation marks for the students to figure out where to put pauses and thought groups. And once the students identified thought groups and pauses, they heard the actual audio and then they practiced reading the passage out loud while still paying attention to the thought groups and appropriate pauses. We use different passages from movies, sitcoms, interviews by famous L1 and L2 speakers of English that were well known by the students. This one is a passage by President Barack Obama. Sometimes we use passages from other speakers like former Costa Rican astronaut Franklin Chang or former Costa Rican President Carlos Alvarado, both of whom are L2 speakers of English, but who are very intelligible and comprehensible. On different occasions, and depending on the feature being studied, we provided the passage with the pauses and thought groups already marked so that learners could focus on other prosodic or connected speech aspects, but still paying attention to features that had been studied previously. These passage exercises were used to raise awareness of prosody and connected speeches. Awareness of forms usually results in more comprehensible L2 speech. Here, for example, the purpose was for students to find words that should be stressed in the passage and others that would normally present reductions like function words. And after that, the students had to listen to the passage to check some of their answers, and then they practiced reading it out loud. Here's another example of a passage we use, and this is a former Costa Rican President Carlos Alvarado in an interview. So here the students had to look for different instances of linking. This one is solved already. And then they had to practice reading the passage and try to practice using appropriate linking. And after this practice, the students participated in a communicative task, which I will show you in some examples later. And finally, here we have the treatment for the mixed group that received instruction of both segmentals and suprasegmentals. Implementing the treatment for the mixed group was much more challenging than the other two groups because we needed to cover the same content as in the other two classes, as in the other two groups, but we only had the same limiting amount of time each week. So for this reason, we only covered 6 vowels and the 6 voiced and voiceless stops. We couldn't cover intonation as in depth as in the suprasegmental group. And to implement the combination of both segmentals and suprasegmentals, we use a technique of thought grouping promoted by John Murphy. So in this case, the teacher started presenting instruction about specific suprasegmentals or connected speech at the thought group level. And then the teacher directed the students' attention to the pronunciation of specific vowels or consonants that happen within the same thought group, that is the same suprasegmentals and segments that were studied by the other two groups. Now, we considered that this was appropriate because of two reasons using thought grouping. First, and as explained by Murphy, there are lots of pronunciation phenomena that happen at the thought group level. Basically, everything happens at the thought group level. So it was easier to bring learners' attention to different segmental, suprasegmentals, and connected speech features within each one of the thought groups. The second reason is that by using thought groups, we could focus on prosody or connected speech first, and then we could bring the learner's attention to very specific consonants or vowels, particularly consonants and vowels that were in the peak syllable. And this is based on Beth Zielinski's research that stated that it's easier for learners to notice segments that happen in the peak syllable because those tend to be more salient. So we did this systematically and on purpose, and you can see it in the graph here, first focusing on the thought groups, then bringing learners' attention to specific suprasegmentals or connected speech within that thought group, and then specific segments within the peak syllable in the same thought group. So let me show you some examples. So here's an example of explicit presentation and listening discrimination, and this is to present the concept of rhythm. So here the teacher provided a short explanation of how rhythm works and how different phrases, no matter the number of words, are supposed to maintain the same beat. Here there's more information using visual aids to show learners that we usually stress some words more than others, and that some words are more salient, right? And at the same time, the words that we don't stress usually go in the background because they are not that salient. So the vowels get reduced in this case, so that we can squeeze those in order to maintain rhythm. So here's a similar activity to the one used with the suprasegmental group. Here the students have to work on this passage and identify words that could receive more stress within the thought groups, and words that could be reduced as well. And after that, the students had to work in pairs, comparing their answers, and then they had to watch the video to confirm their predictions. And after that, the teacher used the same passage to bring the learner's attention to very specific vowels and consonants. In this case, vowels a and e. We extracted specific thought groups from the passage where the target vowels occurred in a stressed syllable to bring learners' attention to these segments, as vowels are longer, higher, and louder in these stressed syllables. And after that, the teacher provided a quick, more information, more explanations about the segments, in this case, differences between these two vowels, and how they could change the meaning of words in minimal pairs. And after that, we had more practice. So in this case, more work with the same passage, in this case, to look for more words that contain these specific sounds, like these specific vowels. And then the students got to practice reading out loud, paying attention to the features that were taught before. So finally, we gave the three groups a communicative task. So we used the same tasks across the three different groups. And the purpose was for students to solve some type of information gap activity or some type of specific task. For example, here's one adopted from Linda Grant's Well Said. The purpose is for students here in groups to come to a consensus as to what specific 7 items from a list they will take with them in case of an evacuation for an emergency. And this is a task fully focusing on meaning, and there are different segmental and suprasegmental features in it that the students would have to use in spontaneous speech. Here's another one, And in this case, this is also a group work in which the students have to organize a dinner party, a farewell dinner party for coworkers in an office. But they have limited budget, so they have to decide what specific aspects they will bring to the party to still make it successful. So the students first work individually, brainstorming different items that they will bring to the party, and they list them here. And then they will have to work in groups to come to a consensus as to what 4 items they are going to bring to the party. So hopefully the purpose of this was to generate a more interaction focusing on meaning. But you can see that hopefully the students had to produce language in which they put into practice different segmental and prosodic features like stressing compound nouns, for example, like ice cream, paper plates, or reductions in function words as in dips and chips or cheese and crackers. You can see that there are also different vowels and consonants that will have to be used in here. So as I said before, we didn't want the students just to have a conversation. We wanted them to work on a task and find a solution to a specific issue, a task that could generate interaction. So to summarize the treatment, you can see that the treatment was different in terms of content. One group received explicit instruction on vowels and consonants. Another group received instruction on prosody and connected speech. And a third group received a combination of both. And with adjustments, of course, because there were also differences. The treatment with adjustments was similar in the types of activities, particularly in the types of practice activities and communicative tasks. So let's go back to the original research questions to discuss these results. So for the first research question, do EFL students improve their comprehensibility, fluency, and accentedness by the end of a 10-week pronunciation classroom intervention? First of all, we have to recognize that our results are very modest. We had a very small sample size. But according to these results, yes, there was an improvement on the part of the suprasegmental group. While there was no improvement in the segmental and mixed groups, some of the individual participants we tested showed an improvement from pre-test to post-test. These results suggest that in the short form, suprasegmental instruction may become or may be more effective in helping learners improve their spontaneous speech. But the results also suggest that explicit instruction can help learners to notice and become aware of L2 phonetic and phonological features, which is a key condition for pronunciation development to take place, as demonstrated by previous research. Now, it's important to notice what happened with the segmental group too. There was no improvement in this group. And our individual analysis demonstrated that learners didn't change that much from pre-test to post-test. And this is probably the result of the fact that these learners focused on segmentals all the time during their treatment. They also carried out tasks like the other 2 groups, but it's possible that just working on individual segments didn't give them a chance to develop more comprehensible and fluent speech because their treatment lacked the prosody of the language that the other 2 groups were exposed to. For our second research question, we asked what type of explicit instruction leads to better comprehensibility, fluency, and accentedness. And according to these results, it looks like a treatment based on suprasegmental seems to be the most effective, mostly in a short period of time. And this result is important for 2 reasons. One, because it confirms what has been claimed in previous studies, which is that prosody plays a key role in the perception of comprehensible speech. And second, because it confirms and gives more validity to our previous results in a study that we published in 2016, in which we got similar results. A group trained in suprasegmentals resulted more comprehensible after an intervention. Now, it is important to notice that the group training, both segmentals and suprasegmentals, the mixed group, also improved their fluency, not their comprehensibility, but their fluency. But this improvement was not statistically significant. With the exception of two participants, most participants in the mixed group either improved comprehensibility or fluency or remained very, very stable from pre-test to post-test. So it's possible that 10 weeks is just not enough time for the development of both segmentals and suprasegmentals together. And previous studies like Trofimovich and Baker have determined that some suprasegmentals take more time to be acquired than others. And also, Flege's speech learning model determines that some categories are acquired gradually and that they take more time to develop. Now, more recent analysis by Lyman et al. And Saito et al. Have also demonstrated that learners need large amounts, not just of input exposure, but also interaction and practice in order to develop fluency. And another important aspect, which has been pointed out by Zielinski and Yates previously, is that in beginner learners, like the ones in this study, fluency may not change much during the beginning stages of learning because of lack of automaticity in speaking. Now, I want to mention here the results of the accentedness ratings also deserve special attention. None of the groups changed their accent significantly from pre-test to post-test, and this finding is important for two reasons. One, because it aligns with previous research in which accentedness didn't change by the end of an intervention. And second, because it highlights the complex relationship between comprehensibility and accentedness since both constructs are partially independent. This means that your speech can be accented, but you can still be very comprehensible. Now, we know that it's very common for language learners and second language speakers in general to have a foreign accent in their L2. It's just part of learning and speaking a second language. It's also the case that previous meta-analysis, like the one by Saito in 2021, have demonstrated that accentedness may be more resistant to the influence of instruction because, and I'm quoting Saito here, accentedness is resistant to change even when segmental and prosody-focused instruction is provided. So this means that any pronunciation intervention, curricula, or pronunciation class should purposefully set realistic goals to help learners develop intelligibility and comprehensibility rather than aiming to remove all traces of a foreign accent. So what are the implications of these results for instructions? And I have a couple of implications here from these results. First is that it is necessary to implement explicit pronunciation instruction. We have evidence from research that pronunciation is still neglected in many contexts or that it is only taught as a response to learners' errors. But explicit instruction that is systematic and anchored on research-based practices, it helps learners become aware of pronunciation features of the L2. Now, it's true that many learners notice forms of the L2 in the input, maybe because they have a good ear for language learning, but the truth is that many other learners benefit from explicit instruction that makes them aware and notice L2 features or differences between the L1 and the L2. So this means that explicit instruction could be valuable to help learners notice pronunciation phenomena like word and sentence stress, intonational contours, rhythmic patterns, or vowel and consonant characteristics. And directing learners' attention to these pronunciation features is important because once learners notice these features, they learn to attend to them in their own speech and compare it to the speech of others, which can result in some form of metalinguistic understanding of how to improve changes in their own speech. The second implication I have has to do with the teaching of suprasegmentals. Our results show that suprasegmental instruction was superior in improving comprehensibility and fluency in spontaneous speech, indicating that instruction in suprasegmentals is more likely to meet the gold standard of pronunciation improvement, which is an improvement that is actually noticeable to listeners. And this is particularly important when there are curricular and time constraints, as it's been demonstrated that a focus on suprasegmentals, even in a short period of time, may result in more comprehensible L2 speech. So suprasegmental instruction is key, but we cannot forget about segments either, right? So learners need to be made aware of specific characteristics among different vowels and consonants because such an awareness could help them sort out misunderstandings in minimal pairs, for example. And our results showed that our mixed group didn't improve comprehensibility or fluency, but it's still important to combine suprasegmentals and segmentals because of the interdependence of these features in English. You can't have one without the other. And in the case of segmentals, instruction should prioritize features that help learners uh, achieve more comprehensible speech, including segmental priorities based on aspects like the learner's L1 background. So for example, maybe learners whose native language is Spanish don't need to focus on liquids R and L, but for learners whose first language is Japanese, this is a key contrast to work on. We should also take into consideration the functional load of different segments or specific segmental phenomena that could be problematic for learners, such as consonant clusters, aspiration of voiceless stops, or differences in vowels based on their acoustic quality. And I'm running out of time here. So before I finish, I would like to give a very special thanks to Marcia and Patrick and the entire CATISL Teaching Pronunciation Interest Group for the invitation and the opportunity to share these results with all of you here today. Special thanks to Isabelle Darcy and the Second Language Psycholinguistics Lab at Indiana University for support with this research and our ongoing collaboration. And special thanks to my colleague Lena Barrantes Elizondo for her key input. Thanks to all the participants at different stages of the project. Thanks to our collaborating teachers, Marianela Sandi, Sofia Mora, and Roger Segura. And last but not least, thank you to all of you in the audience for your attention. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have now. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you so much. That you've really given us quite a lot to think about. And I can't imagine how you had your teachers teach so much in
It was a challenge.
a short time. It's like, and I was thinking about all of the materials that you had to prepare in advance to give to the teachers and then sequence them and tell them, do it in this order and do it with this, I'm just tingling with excitement about how you did that. Okay, now I'm going to let other people express their comments and ask their questions. So please feel free to open your mics and ask our speaker, Joshua, your questions.
Works very well, but if you want the slides and the references, I'll be happy to send them to you. You can
Okay, yeah, I'm going to be sending out to everybody afterwards, all of you registrants. Don't worry, I'll send you out a follow-up as I always do after our seminars. So you'll get some information and links that will work. All right, so don't be shy. Come on, we're the talky people, right? We like to pronounce and teach pronunciation. So go ahead and raise your hand if you feel shy about it, or just speak.
I have a question. What would be the best approach when you're teaching a integrated skills class that's actually not textbook bound? So I have OER I'm developing for my students, and just this week I decided, since we're focusing on the simple present for my low intermediate students, I felt it was necessary to talk about the pronunciation differences with the ending of ed at the end, for example. And so I felt that was a good approach to interject pronunciation, but now I'm kind of running out of ideas because I don't want to make it it's not a pronunciation class, so I'm trying to figure out how to integrate those concepts effectively.
Yeah, no, I think it sounds like a good approach because it sounds like you're taking advantage of specific pronunciation features that you find in the materials that you're using already, and you're bringing learners' attention to those features. And that's basically what it's recommended. That sometimes, even if it's not pronunciation, you can still bring learners' attention to pronunciation features that are in the content, right? Because pronunciation is everywhere. So if you're teaching, for example, even if you're teaching something like grammar, okay, there might be features, as you said, like the final ed that you could bring to the learner's attention, or how to pronounce the final s in third person singular or plural nouns, for example. Even issues like at the thought group level, right? When our students read a passage, and so teaching learners, for example, where to put specific pauses, uh, issues like linking, very specific features that you could use from the materials that you have in order to bring learners' attention to that. So,
Well, thank you, Josh. I appreciate that.
Okay.
Great question, and thank you very much for the response. And we have a lot of people who are lauding your presentation. Is there anybody else who has a question to ask our presenter?
Just a quick.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, yeah. First, thank you. I haven't been to one of these presentations in a while, so it was really enjoyable. Unfortunately, where I teach, we don't have a speaking or pronunciation class, but I do sneak it into our reading class, like as part of vocabulary. But I was wondering, have you found in your research or anywhere what level you think this type of work would have the most effect? Because I think you said in this one they were kind of beginner students, like what an intermediate group. Would you think you would see more like benefit to teaching suprasegmentals and segmentals? Or if they're too advanced, would you see you know what I mean? Is there a Goldilocks zone where like this teaching you would expect to see a lot of results?
No, I think that for any group at any proficiency, you're going to see definitely some changes. So the fact that the students might be beginners doesn't mean that you cannot teach them pronunciation, right? Like you can start with very small things, and these were beginner learners. Most of them were beginner learners, so you can see that there is still some improvement. Sometimes, obviously, because of the proficiency of the students, it's kind of difficult to do some of these things, but it doesn't mean that it's impossible. So I would say that by integrating little by little, like bringing learners' attention to very specific features little by little, issues like there is a changing intonation here. Okay, listen to this changing intonations, or linking, for example, or differences between two contrasting sounds. So yeah, even if they are beginner learners, obviously with more advanced learners, there are some other issues, some other features that you could make them more aware of. Okay, but that's the idea, to start integrating pronunciation right from the very beginning.
Thank you.
All right, that's excellent. Thank you. Our time is up. And so I'd like to thank you once again for being our wonderful presenter, and thank you for the audience to be such active participants. Some of you are already on our list, but if you haven't yet joined our list, this one is specifically to tell you when we're going to do our next presentation. We do have information that goes out in a lot of different forms and at different modules and different places, but if you want specifically what CATISL topic is going to be putting out, then please join this specific e-list. And don't worry, we're not going to spam you. We're just going to tell you what is coming up. Also, remember that you can subscribe to the CATISL YouTube channel, which has a lot of different IGs, levels, and chapters putting out videos to share with our teachers. One more thing that I'd like to say is that CATISL has now a disaster relief fund, and we're especially featuring helping the Southern California, the LA fire disaster victims. And we would like to let you know that if you need help or know somebody who does need help, who's a CATISL member, let them know of this, because this is for both people who help and helpers who would like to support the fund. And last of all, I would like to thank everybody, especially Dr. Gordon, for this awesome presentation, and we hope to see you again. We'll be online in April. We will be on the ground at TESOL Long Beach next month. That's March 18th through, what is it, 21st? And so we hope that many of you will see you, many of you there. April 11th will be our next topic webinar. So keep that in mind, and we'll be sending out information. Thanks again.